I was skip diving in Kentish Town, and in this skip, I discovered a book called Marching to the Drums, From the Kabul Massacre to the Siege of Mafeking. And it was a fairly gung-ho military history full of stirring tales of colonial derring-do in the British Empire's overseas campaigns from 1860 to 1902. So you've got a chapter on Gordon of Khartoum, Omdurman, Charge the Light Brigade. And at the top of each little chapter, there was this little introductory, standalone paragraph in bold, just explaining what the British Army happened to be doing in Afghanistan, Egypt, Sudan. And because the people who read gung-ho military histories like Marching to the Drums are really only interested in one thing: weapons. Weapons and maybe tactics, but on the whole, weapons. There was a refreshing honesty, candour and lack of hypocrisy about this little standalone introductory paragraph. With its opening in 1869, the Suez Canal became the principal waterway to Britain's most valuable overseas possession, India. It was therefore imperative for the British Army to control all traffic through the Suez Canal, which meant, first of all, crushing the indigenous independence movements of Egypt and the Sudan. Now, the Webley automatic Gatling gun was able to fire 500 rounds a minute. This proved more than a match for the scimitar swords and wicker breastplates of the Mahdi army. And this bold stating of the geopolitical facts of life strikes the modern reader with the force of revelation. For there is, in our own time, an absolute taboo among the corporate news media and the political class against mentioning anything to do with these strategic and economic reasons for war. As witness, just over a year ago, I'm listening to the Today programme on Radio 4, and there was this little phrase they kept repeating on the half hour, every half hour. The G8 has today endorsed an American plan to bring democracy to the Middle East. The G8 has today endorsed an American plan to bring democracy to the Middle East. The level of naivety necessary before you can talk about an American plan to bring democracy to the Middle East. You will not find that level of naivety anywhere outside of 1970s porno films. Gee, mister, you mean the time machine only works if I take off all my clothes? The G8 has today endorsed an American plan to bring democracy to the Middle East. An American plan to bring democracy to the Middle East. And the reason they can foist such phrases upon us daily is because the British are unique among nations in their naivety about geopolitics, about the strategic and economic reasons for war, because we are unique among nations in our ignorance about our own history. How curious, for example, that the First World War is never taught in our schools as an invasion of Iraq. I am sure many of you, like me, have never been entirely satisfied with the standard explanation we were given at secondary school for the causes and origins of the First World War. The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. I mean, no one is that popular. A somewhat more efficient cause might be the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. Commenced construction in the years leading up to the First World War. The Royal Navy had just switched from coal to oil. German Navy follows suit, but they don't have no oil-producing colonies. No place in the sun. Thus begins Drang nach Osten, the drive to the east, spine of which policy is the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. Now, there's already track laid from Berlin to Constantinople. Of course, it's called the Orient Express. Germans just have to build the last 900 clicks. It's going to take them clear into Baghdad, but there is huge opposition to this project among the major European powers, the Russians, the French, the Dutch, the Belgians, and the British. We're opposed to this for two main reasons. Firstly, we recognize that we cannot compete with the Germans in engineering terms alone, because we know that passengers will simply not accept the Sarajevo to Basra replacement bus service. Secondly, we know once this is built, ain't nothing to stop a Munich businessman getting out of the Baghdad terminus with a Deutsche Bank checkbook, smashing our cartel. So a phony war begins. Churchill, who is Minister for War and Air, dispatches to the Gulf Sidney Riley, who's described in one leading textbook of the period as, I'm quoting now, probably the most famous spy of the early 20th century. Now, call me naive about international espionage, but if you are the most famous spy, you are the worst. And so it proves. Sidney Riley arrives in the Gulf with J-Lo and Beyonce on either arm. The paparazzi are there, flashbulbs pop. War breaks out because it's a war to defend plucky Belgian neutrality, remember, while the Belgians are pluckily defending Congolese rubber and ivory, the first British regiment to be deployed in the First World War, the Dorset Regiment, goes to Basra, 1914, where it is joined by 51 other British divisions. Now, if you go onto the Dorset Regiment's website, I have way too much free time. Plenty you're gonna read about the 1st Battalion of the Dorsets going to Mons in 1914. Nothing. Not a word about the 2nd Battalion of the Dorsets going to Basra in 1914, and therefore, my friends, I believe we may conclude with some confidence that had Wilfred Owen or Siegfried Sassoon fought by the Tigris or the Euphrates instead of by the Somme, we would never have heard of them. They could have sent truckloads to the front, full of nothing but poets. But if they'd fought in Iraq in the First World War, we would not know of a single man jack them. Why? Because your good war, your just war, has always been presented as a one-off, a discrete event, no more connected to other wars than consecutive productions in the same musical, because otherwise, all the just war, good cause, humanitarian arguments, they begin to unravel if ever a war is seen to be part of a continuous foreign policy that has remained absolutely consistent for decades. In the 95 years since Mesopotamian oil was first struck at Masjidi Suleiman, and a British lieutenant sent a telegram to the Glasgow office of Burma Oil which read, "See Psalm 104, verse 15, line 3," which is, of course... See, now, when I did my gig in Texas, the entire audience, as one, roared out, "That he may bring out of the earth oil to make a cheerful countenance." In the 95 years since that telegram was deciphered in Glasgow, Britain has been at war with or occupying Iraq for 45 of them. Now, if you're a broadcaster, a journalist looking for a neutral, objective, analytical, coldly rational, ideologically uncluttered way to describe that reality, the phrase you're looking for will be something about British and American plans to bring democracy to the Middle East. Some kind of psalm singing is called for, some raising of hosannas to our benevolence. Which is why, when they asked me to go on Question Time, I said no. Because on that show there's this rigid adherence to a dogmatic, entirely fictitious version of world events. And if you step outside it, you're just off the spectrum, they can't even hear you. And if I went on Question Time, there'd be a real danger that I'd just come across as some sort of anarchist nutter. Well, allow me to elucidate with reference to specifics. Were I, for example, to go on Question Time and say, if the Nuremberg laws applied, Tony Blair would be hung, they'd lose their mind. This is rhetoric, offensive, sloganeering, nonsense, empirically true fact, by the way. What they were hung for at Nuremberg was, quote, planning and waging an aggressive war, full stop. No human being was tried for genocide on planet Earth until 1996, when the post-Habyarimana Hutu power were put on the stand in Kigali. What they were hung for at Nuremberg was planning and waging an aggressive war. Yes, but still offensive sloganeering, just nonsense. Of course, we know in all seriousness. Of course, Blair can't actually be a war criminal, can he? Of course, Tony Blair can't be a war criminal. I mean, he listens to Oasis. And he can't be a war criminal because we know what war criminals look like. And they look like Goebbels. But what did Goebbels look like to the Germans? Well, you know, we're a modernising party. We've broken the mould of German politics. And sometimes it's better to be on the losing side for the right reasons than to be on the winning side for the wrong reasons. I know, of course, that the war has caused deep divisions in the country. But I also know we are faced with a real problem of global terrorism, which is not simply going to go away.
much as we may wish it. And the only way we can deal with this problem is to kill and maim in Iraq in a war that Kofi Annan describes as illegal, because I'll tell you this, if there is any other way at all of uniting the forces of secular Arab nationalism with those of militant Islam, then, I'd like to hear it.